to give a proper introduction to Camille. Camille Gray is an astrologer, musician, writer, civil servant, and she lives in Washington, D.C. She is available for readings. She started her practice in 2017, and her consults are steeped in soulful concepts, archetypal poetry of evolutionary astrology, and informed in the technical and traditional techniques of Hellenistic astrology. Camille writes about astrology for her website, social media, and the Astrology Podcast with Chris Brennan. She's also a staff writer for Stars Align, a dating app, which is super cool. So, Camille's going to be talking today all about Neptune and the Black experience. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me this Saturday. My talk is called Neptune and the Black Condition, a look at powerful Neptunian archetypes woven into the Black experience. Now, the idea of Black folks as Neptunian was actually an aside or a remark that was made by another astrologer called Vernon Robinson, and he made this aside during a lecture about the astrology of the first slave ship. Even though it was something that he just kind of mentioned, it did spark a lot of revelations in me, and it prompted me to do a little bit more research about this connection. Now, it felt right at the time, but I didn't yet understand the depth of why. So today I present to you what I hope is a coherent and compelling body of evidence for this theory. Beyond just Black folks being Neptunian in spirit or having Neptunian roots, but also Neptunian archetypes and topics mapping onto our unique experiences of adversity. Neptune is the planet of the oppressed, falling into Neptunian traps, victims of Neptunian biases, lies, and fears, but also torch carriers of Neptune's magic and transcendence. So let's begin with this quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. It says, "The Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world." Now, seventh son is to have special powers, powers that allow Black folks to traverse this veil. The veil is this invisible blanket of consciousness that forces Black people to see themselves through the projection of others. Second sight and double consciousness, which alludes to the struggle of Black people to form their own perceptions of self in the presence of this veil. Now, to me, this all holds a distinctly Neptunian struggle, to slip between realities, to be trapped in someone else's dream or distortion of you. The struggle to reconcile two versions of reality, the one that is forced upon you and the one that you try to make for yourself, to be up against invisible forces. I also want to share with you this powerful clip of James Baldwin, which I think is a great table setting for this talk. I do hope that you can hear this, and forgive me as I move the mic closer to my computer so you can do so.
What is this image that you were? This is precisely what it's so difficult to get down to. But let me try to put it this way. What is he? I don't know what white people see. No, when they look at a Negro anymore. But I do know very well that I realized when I was very young that whatever he was looking at, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was something he was afraid of. It was something to which he was attracted or which he found repulsive, but it wasn't me.
It wasn't me. So I accompanied this clip with a quote from Stephen Forrest's Book of Water. It says, "I fall in love with a projection of my own mind, mistaking it for the reality of another person." Pulled from a chapter, of course, on the planet of Neptune. Now, Neptune has many faces, of course, many disguises. Of the planet Neptune, the astrologer Robert Pelletier says, quote, "It is the unconscious, the sympathy, empathy, aesthetic appreciation, utopia, rhythm, illusion, and poetry. It is music, imagination, and psychism, but it's also fantasy, eroticism, and slavery." Now, we will be meeting some of these faces of Neptune in this talk, as well as the faces of Neptune named here on the screen, from awakening to media plagiarism, projection, which we've met, exploitation, theft, whitewashing, soul, forgiveness, spirituality, culture, denial, passivity, proliferation, and disappointment. Neptune and the African Diaspora. So Neptune was the Roman god of waters and seas, and his eponymous planet is associated with the ocean. Now, the ocean, of course, facilitated the theft of African slaves across the world, so that our Neptunian condition began out on open water feels like a very appropriate seeding. Diaspora. That's the movement, migration, or scattering of a people away from an established or ancestral homeland. And one of Neptune's roles is to disperse, to spread, in ways that create ubiquity, in ways that water down, and in ways that create separation and confusion. For Black folks, the question, "Where are you from?" is incredibly tricky to navigate. Sometimes even the pushback, "No, but where are you really from?" especially when traveling abroad. And then even on our home turf, the sometimes shouts of "Go back to where you've come from." Now, a lot of us do not have the privilege of knowing where from is because of that movement and that spread, that watering down of a claim to any true homeland. And in the hands of a bad faith actor, the question, "Where are you from?" is intended to provoke feelings of unbelonging. And so it puts us in a very Neptunian space, this liminal space, where we are not American enough to be American, but also aren't truly connected to any other country. This dilemma of being incarnate, but belonging nowhere, a constant exile. I want to bring to you the work of some Black archaeologists who are spearheading this mission to study global slave theft by excavating sunken ships in the Atlantic Ocean. This struck a chord with me, right? Diving into the very waters where our Neptunian condition hastened. And to quote Gabrielle Miller, who is floating so ethereally on screen, a diver and a maritime archaeologist, she says, "Many died on the voyage and became a permanent part of the sea." So to be entombed in the ocean, a Neptunian grave, cementing for some a Neptunian legacy that they were never afforded the ability to escape. Neptune and what I'm calling the original sin of illusion. Frederick Douglass once said, "I did not know I was a slave until I found out that I couldn't do the things that I wanted." And one of Neptune's manifestations is to weaken one's agency and dignity, weaken the healthy boundaries of ego, weaken individual freedoms, weakened until you're not living for yourself, weakened until your desires become subsumed under a greater power. So like a sedative that is administered to make the limbs go limp and to make the spirit docile, Neptunian illusions were injected into the veins of the Black body politic. Illusions of another superiority, illusions born of religion and ideas of piety and purity, illusions born of fanaticism, illusions born of messianic neuroses, which purport one group as the savior and another group as helpless and in need of divine correction. These are all Neptunian complexes, and they propped up the sanctification of what Douglass called slave-holding Christianity, which was a foul distortion that protected the slave trade and those who perpetuated it under the guise of acting out some holy Neptunian plan. Now, Black folks couldn't build a sovereign reality for themselves in a world full of rampant unreality. So, like a bout of sleep paralysis almost, Black folks walk through this American life acutely aware of the nightmarish fabrications that hold them down, labor their breath, but cannot wake up. And that reeks of Neptune to me. Now, a lie that is agreed upon becomes a truth. A lie that is allowed to take root becomes the ground upon which reality is built. And these illusions have built very real barriers for Black folks. They continue to weaken and to undermine economically, socially, politically, medically. These are diseases of Neptune, diseases that have metastasized and spread so insidiously, so pervasively. And the only cure is truth in a nation that has built no tolerance for the truth. Now, Neptune is the most elevated planet in America's natal chart, the Sibley chart, and it's in Mercury's sign of Virgo. So a weaver of false realities for sure, but also toxic and delusional ideas of purity. Who gets to participate in the American dream? Who is shamed? Who is denied? Who is good enough? This intoxication with ideas of perfection and a deep attachment to the illusion of meritocracy. Neptune and Denial. To quote James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, for nothing can be changed until it is faced. Now, Neptune can have a very hard time with reality. It creates the reality that it can accept rather than the reality that is, at times rendering certain realities as non-issues, at other times rendering certain realities invisible. Whether it's in the assertion that reverse racism is just as harmful, whether it's in the insistence that Black folks are to blame for their own social standing exclusively, whether it's in the diminishing of a centuries-long strife between law enforcement and the Black community, whittling down that to the work of a few bad apples, or whether it's even in the more benign and well-meaning ways that folks can proclaim colorblindness, which effectively erases the histories that inform our humanity. However it shows up, this denial is everywhere. Denial that these harsh realities do indeed exist for us. So much denial that some states are erasing our histories out of their textbooks and making it illegal to talk about or to teach. So I pulled this time cover, The Overdue Awakening, both as proof positive that these denials are rampant, reaching a fever pitch in 2020, when the lynching of George Floyd prompted a nationwide outcry. But I also chose it because of the word awakening. Now, denial and awakening are two sides of the same Neptunian coin. Neptune is frequently talked about in relationship to spiritual awakenings, this kind of slow but sweeping onset of clarity and awareness. But anyone who has actually been through a spiritual awakening knows how excruciatingly uncomfortable it is to shed one reality in favor for the other. And in the face of that discomfort, and through the guise of Neptune, we numb, escape, we blame, and we deny. That first stage of grief. Now, this denial makes it so that Black folks are seemingly up these invisible forces, ghosts, unable to name or reckon with them without being accused of pulling the race card or being labeled as angry. Now, healing will never be possible until we are able to face and understand the wound. And kind of like how a fish never knows that it's swimming in water until the moment that it is yanked out of it. Neptune and the blues. In the face of insurmountable dehumanization, where is one to turn? Music. Now, people give music to Venus, and I would agree, but the power and the presence and the ubiquity of Black music pushes it beyond a Venusian threshold and into Neptunian territory, which is the stuff of the zeitgeist. Venus is the individual ways that music is styled, yes, but Neptune is the realm of inspiration that it is all sourced from. In his book, Astrology, Karma, and Transformation, Stephen Arroyo says of Neptune, quote, "It represents the urge to escape from all limitation, both the limitations of material existence and the limitations of personality and ego. One can seek to escape through either self-destructive or personally constructive activities. Music is certainly one of those constructive activities." Now, on plantations, Black folks sang what became referred to as African or Negro spirituals in order to sustain their humanity in the face of radical dehumanization. They sang to communicate in code with one another, which, how Neptunian is that? They sang because it was the only permitted way to express emotion. They sang because it was the vessel through which they could regard themselves as exalted beings that were made in the image of a God who would deliver divine justice, if not on the earthly plane, then certainly in an afterlife. Now, in the 1860s, the blues emerged as an offspring of these slave songs and spirituals, and partly due to the tumult of the Civil War. These songs were an expression of sorrow, but they were also prayers. Now, B.B. King, a famous blues guitarist on screen for you now, regards the blues as, quote, "the one form that has followed our path from slavery to freedom." So here we see divinity, disappointment, existential despair, the belief in immaterial forces at play, longing, yearning, the desire to transcend through melody, and the thirst for a reality that never quite comes. It all bears a Neptunian DNA. And blue is the color of the planet Neptune. Now, the blues gave rise to some of America's most popular music stylings, of course, jazz, gospel, rock, R&B, country, and more on hip hop later. And so here I want to introduce some other faces of Neptune: appropriation, deception, and plagiarism. Neptune does not cite its sources. Now, the co-opting of Black music and the erasure of Black musical origins is now a culturally recognized phenomenon. We see it in Elvis's rendition of Hound Dog, which was actually written by blues and R&B singer Big Mama Thornton. And we see it at work today, like through K-pop's hijacking of Black accents, sounds, and styles. Rolling Stone notes that, quote, "in the 1950s, white performers started covering hit singles by Black artists, introducing them to the pop audience, i.e. white listeners, and making far more money than the Black artists who wrote the songs in the first place," unquote. Now, oftentimes, even today, Black and white artists are separated into two different genres despite doing music, right, in incredibly similar styles. White artists are placed usually under the pop umbrella, which is a genre that has an aggressive marketing machine behind it. It allows for more reach and thus more profit. Black artists are relegated to genres like urban, with their music only being tailored and marketed towards a smaller Black audience. White artists are propped up at the expense of Black artists, the very same ones that inspire them. So not only does Neptune describe the proliferation of Black music, the sheer popularity of it and its reach, the appeal that makes it such a ripe pool of inspiration for others, but it also describes a disregard and ignorance of Black musical origins, Black artists, in favor of a repackaged and whitewashed copy. So what starts as a celebration of heritage, this earnest reprieve from relentless suffering, can and was slowly eroded by a dominant culture that wanted to commodify and repackage it as a creation of their own. So here are those blurred boundaries that Neptune is known for: the deception, disguising, obscuring, the erasure and the warping of a thing happening so insidiously that it eventually seems normal, and the robbing of credit where credit is due. This thin line between cultural appreciation, which centers its forebears, and cultural appropriation, which erases them. And then before you know it, country music's Black origins are forgotten. So much so that in 2024, a Black woman releasing a country album is still seen as a subversive act. Pictured here is DJ Kool Herc, who invented what eventually became hip hop on an August night in 1973. And like the blues, hip hop was also born out of a similar collective despair. Now, part of my research into this Neptune connection included finding the charts of pivotal events in Black history and seeing what Neptune was doing. My hunch was that if Neptune could represent the experience of a community, its placement in a chart could convey something important about a moment in time, an event, and its mark on the community. So kind of like a shift in trajectory or a moment for the culture. Now, I discovered that Neptune was showing up loudly in a lot of those charts. From the Nat Turner slave rebellion in 1831, which had Neptune in the seventh house across from the ascendant, from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in 1963, which had Neptune conjunct the ascendant, to Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, which had Neptune high in the 10th house, to even the first ever taping of the Oprah Winfrey Show, which had Neptune in the 4th. Even the natal chart of the start of slavery in America has Neptune in the 10th house. And the Neptunian imprint on hip hop is also quite profound. So hip hop was officially born on August 11th, 1973, whereabouts 9 p.m. in the Bronx. It places Neptune high in the sky in the 10th house in Sagittarius as the most elevated planet, thus describing the legacy of this moment and the legacy of hip hop writ large. Now, of course, hip hop was born of a mixture of cultural elements from African American, Afro-Caribbean, and Latino. It's an eclectic mix of art forms and subgenres from beatboxing to DJing to table scratching. Now, this is also incredibly fitting for mutable Sagittarius, pulling cultural references from all over the globe. But it's also really, really fitting for the downstream nature of Neptune, which creates many, many tributaries that emanate from the same source. Now, hip hop has also been a vessel for social and political commentary. And like the blues, the force that it has created, right, has allowed Black people to express their angst, this outlet to feel empowered. I want you to notice the trine between that Neptune in Sagittarius to Mercury in Leo. That makes things really, really personal. It makes things loud. It makes things come from the heart. It's an amplification of stories that would otherwise be relegated to the footnotes. But as a global force, hip hop and its culture has been exploited in ways that do not always benefit the communities that created it. Now, this is also Neptune's legacy, a proliferation that is so widespread that every iteration, every copy offers less and less integrity, kind of like a game of telephone, with the eventual message a degraded mockery of the original one. Now, hip hop is incredibly intertwined with Black culture, with its impact felt through clothing, beauty trends, vernacular. Again, all of these downstream cultural artifacts are subject to the same theft and distortion. Now, I want you to consider streetwear or urban wear, which originated again on the streets of the Bronx with influences from California surf culture. It was, quote, the uniform of the rebels, the outcasts, and those on the peripheries. It was a statement, a form of resistance, and a canvas for self-expression. So we have baggy pants, hoodies, thick gold chains, these earnest and bold and colorful expressions. Remember that Mercury and Leo. But they were turned slowly into moral panics, with some states enacting anti-sagging bans, which punished violators who had their pants hanging a little bit too low with real jail time. Now, in the same vein, I want you to consider in this current era, who can get away with wearing a hoodie? On whom is it professional and cool? And on whom is it a catalyst for violence? Similarly, I want you to consider who can get away with wearing braids. Now, braids and hair, it's never just a hairstyle for Black women, right? Our hair is a connection to wisdom, to God. It is how our ancestors communicated with one another. It is how we snuck rice and gold around. Rice for the sustenance on the journey across the ocean, and gold to be able to build a life after escaping. It is how we hid maps and instructions that would lead us to safety. And these are called Fulani braids, and they were never called and never will ever be called Bo Derek braids. So here we encounter what is called a double standard, a rule or a principle which is unfairly applied in different ways to different people or different groups at different times. So things that are fluid, things that are inconsistent, things that cast confusion or doubt are inherently Neptunian in nature, and they are all manifestations of that veil. In an article for Paper Magazine, the writer Wanda Thompson, who is credited for popularizing the term blackfishing, made the following critique. She says, quote, "White women have been able to steal looks and styles from Black women. These women have the luxury of selecting which aspects they want to emulate without having to fully deal with the consequences of Blackness," unquote. So on one group, donning these styles is considered cool or on trend, irresistibly sexy. But on another group, they become catalysts for punishment, mockery, or even worse, violence. Now, cultural spread is an inevitability. Humans are communal, exchange will happen. Cultural appropriation spurs debates about freedom and choice and expression. But really, it's about the dynamics of power and powerlessness. To quote, "When the powerful appropriate from the oppressed, society's imbalances are exacerbated and inequalities are prolonged." Now, the term blackfishing, which is a derivative of the term catfishing, means to create intentional ambiguity about one's race in order to be perceived as Black. And to quote comedian Paul Mooney, "Everybody wants to be Black, but nobody wants to be Black." Right? And it's double binds like this, irreconcilable, confusing, that makes Neptune such a powerful player in our game. Also to note, Black folks are incredibly aesthetic, right? One of those significations of Neptune. We are a really, really fashionable bunch. We had to take appearance seriously because it was one of the only ways we can get our foot in the door. Now, sometimes those blurry lines can work in our favor, as in the phenomenon of passing. Black folks plausibly posing as white, sometimes only temporarily, to gain freedom or access to power. Now, Black folks can and have actively participated in this veil, deceit and trickery, but this time for access for things or access to things, rather than the denial of that access. Now, Neptune doesn't only describe the version of the world that exists at our expense, it also describes many beautiful facets of our culture. Take soul food, for instance. Soulfulness plays in the realm of Neptune. Neptune is the planet that can connect us to something that is beyond ourselves. It's the planet that sees us not just as a physical body, but as the energy that inhabits it. And some would call that a soul. Now, it is called soul food in homage to the soul that Black folks put into everything. Soul, which I think emanates from this deepened emotional response to our earthly condition. Even what we cook cannot help but to absorb our soul, and that is the permeation of Neptune. But it's not just soul food. There are soul shakes, soul haircuts, soul barbershops, soul music, soul brothers, soul sisters, soul train, and modern derivatives like Black girl magic. Now, these are all invocations of the invisible yet palpable spirit that animates the Black community and uplifts Black consciousness. Neptune, religion, spirituality, and metaphysics. Now, we are a woo-woo bunch. We call Jupiter the planet of religion, which is true, but I see Jupiter as the concept of religion and the proselytizing of perspectives, a desire to convert or to be right. Neptune, on the other hand, is the actual experience of divinity, and it pulls in spiritual connections that exist outside the dogma of religion. Neptune deals with what is holy, what is sacred, and all manners of spirits in general. Now, slaves were forced to leave behind their indigenous religions and practice under a white colonist Christian framework, a framework that propagandized the doctrines of passive submission, which very much suited slave owners. And note that passivity is one of those faces of Neptune. But we come from deeply spiritual origins, chock full of altar worship, offerings, fortune telling, rituals, and forms of divination like tarot and astrology. Now, some of these more mystical origins are still alive and well in America today, like through Santeria or Hoodoo, which are a synergy of Christianity and indigenous African religion. Now, concerning traditional African religion, W.E.B. Du Bois writes, quote, "Under the headship of the chief and the potent influence of the priest, his religion was nature worship, with profound belief in invisible surrounding influences, good and bad, and his worship was through the incantation and sacrifice." Neptune. Now, the Black church also has a stronghold in the Black community, with churches often serving as a haven or a place to escape the hostile climate of racial injustice, especially during the civil rights era. The quote provided, quote, "a liminal space brimming with subversive features," unquote, like the power of prayer to neutralize or to eliminate racism. Hope and healing were emergent themes in the church, as were sorrow and despair. Now, the fish is a widely recognized symbol of Christianity, and I can't help but see the connection between Neptune's oceans and the fish that inhabit it. I also see Neptune in the sacred rite of baptism, or the use of water to cleanse, purify, and to connect. Historian Ted Ownby noted that one of the main differences between the way that white people and Black people practice the Baptist faith is that Black Baptist churches often emphasize political engagement and community leadership, where white Baptist churches emphasize individual spiritual growth and development. So the awareness of collective effort rings Neptunian to me, owing again to this planet's ability to create ubiquity, but also because Neptune is the planet that makes us most aware of the other, our interconnectivity. It transcends material limitations. These things aren't just individual efforts in the Black communities. These are collective ones. Now, to note, some Black people do carry with them the heaviness of representing their entire race, the myth of monolith, especially as they ascend into higher echelons of society or start to integrate primarily white spaces. Now, aside from the burden that that does entail, it also sees us moving as one, towards one universal goal. Into every room a Black person enters, the entire community feels to enter it too. It is why, for instance, the only two Black men on a crowded street in Tokyo can recognize one another with a smile or a nod, because even though they're strangers, they exist together in a world of their own, a world of communal experiences which forges this implicit friendship even before one word has been exchanged between them. And there is something Neptunian in that transmission. to wink at a soul of the other because you know that you have both weathered similar storms. Neptune and Forgiveness. In his article, Why Are Black People So Forgiving? For The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates says, they are forgiving because they do not have the weaponry to be any other way. In the face of abject atrocities committed against them, Black people forgive. We saw it in the forgiveness that was extended to Dylan Roof, who shot and killed 8 Black people inside the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina. We saw it in the brother of the slain Botham John when he asked the judge to hug Amber Geiger, a Dallas police officer who shot and killed Botham while he was in his own home, and that is pictured on the screen. We can even see it in the nonviolent protests of the civil rights era. Despite it all, there's this insistence on being gentle and on peacemaking. Now, whether or not these acts of forgiveness are agreed with by all, they do show another face of Neptune, the one that shows a compassion and an empathy that is beyond human mortal understanding, a grace that is way too powerful to name. These acts of forgiveness are not an endorsement of racial violence. We forgive so that we can heal. It initiates a process of alleviating unspeakable pain. And at times, it feels certainly like healing isn't going to be coming from anywhere else. Astrologer Susan Miller says, quote, Neptune refines, it purifies, and it cleanses. Any planet visiting Neptune will come away purer. This planet cannot bear coarseness. It cannot bear coarseness. So one can think that in the face of all the hard things we have been through as a community, forgiveness is a way to finally let some softness in. Neptune shows up so powerfully in the charts of notable famous Black folks who were the first of their kind to do something, and in the charts of juggernauts in Black history. And by powerful, I mean Neptune is either on an angle, an aspect to an angle, an aspect to the nodal axis or the sun, or it's the most elevated planet in a chart. Now, of course, not all Black people who shape Black culture will necessarily meet these Neptunian conditions, nor does everyone that has a strong Neptune indelibly change Black culture. Like any archetype, broad strokes may capture a critical mass of people, but maybe not everyone. Now, I won't share them all now, but there are over 50 instances of a strong Neptune showing up in the folks of people on screen and many, many, many more. Very happy to produce a list of them later, but in the interest of time, I will move on. Now, one thing that is a late addition to this presentation is that we finally got the birth time of Mrs. Beyonce Knowles. Now, if Neptune was going to show up powerfully in the charts of powerful Black people, I had to think Beyonce needed to have Neptune somewhere prominent. And up until 2 days ago, we didn't know because we did not have her birth time. But we do now, and we see Neptune as the most elevated planet in her chart, trine the ascendant. I want to end with a poem by Lucille Clifton called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up, here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I feel the Neptune in that poem, the pain of exile, the indifference to one's humanity, There is something interminable about Neptune, since Neptune deals with all that is intangible, and thus is not subject to the laws of physical reality. Despite the egregious harms that inform our legacy, our pasts, and our present, Black people bend, but they never quite break. Now, this isn't Saturnian resilience, which is stoic. It affixes itself to structures and to systems that can endure or bear weight. And that's because those systems were never made for us, and those structures do not exist for us. This is not bootstrapping because we were never given boots. This is Neptunian resilience. It's created from nothing. It's a manifestation of intention, resilience that is buoyant, unrigid. It flexes and it contracts. Resilience that is joyful, creative, and hopeful. Resilience that presents as this otherworldly endowment, granting us the power to exist in a world that is hell-bent on antagonizing or erasing that existence. It is resilience that is nothing short of miraculous when you really think about it. We are the dreams of our ancestors, walking, talking, breathing dreams. And though there is still a lot to be done, we exist in a world that was once only the faintest shimmer in someone else's imagination. And that is the work of Neptune. These are some of the sources I relied on. Neptune doesn't cite its sources. I do. Happy to produce this as well if anyone wants to look into this further. But otherwise, thank you for your time today. On the screen is my website and my social media handle, where you can find me talking about all things astrology at all times, and even some humorous stories about my own life. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Camille. That was wonderful. That was so inspirational and educational. And I think if I'm reading all the comments, a lot of people are, some of the words, profound, beautiful, impactful. So a lot of kudos in the comments to you. We do have a question, and it was actually a really great question. So let's talk a little bit about in the last few minutes. Do you have a view on the upcoming Saturn conjunction with Neptune at Aries, 0 Aries? In February. Neptune is currently anaretic at 29 Pisces, and Saturn is catching up. So yeah, that's obviously going to be powerful, and we're seeing so much right now coming down. I mean, so have at it.
I knew someone was going to ask this because Neptune is doing something really powerful right now. It just shifts signs. I see Neptune in Aries hopefully as being this point of like the rallying cry, right? Where things, it's kind of like when the water gets too hot and you're boiling over, there's nothing else to do but to scream, but to yell, but to like, fight in a way that maybe Neptune and Pisces didn't truly have the capacity to. So I feel like Neptune and Pisces was the dream we were dreaming, Black Lives Matter, the hope, right, of one day being treated fairly. And I think maybe Neptune in Aries is the fight that's behind that desire, I would say. As far as the conjunction from Neptune and Saturn together, gosh, that can go any way, right? It can be like the melting of everything we've ever known, every structure that's been there, but it can also be the loosening and the reimagining, right, of those structures in a very bold, brave new Aries way. Probably both will be happening at the same time. But I'm fundamentally hopeful about what it means for all of us.
Oh, that's good to hear. Okay. So another question that we have is, can you speak to any research or your thoughts on the biracial experience, that in between the neither black nor white?
Ooh, yeah, that is a good one. And something about this talk that I'm always kind of like doing is adding more places where this kind of Neptune confusion slips into our experience. I did the slide on passing quite recently because I just remember that it's a phenomenon that's in our community, but I haven't expanded that further to the biracial experience. So I would have to do a little bit more research on that because there is, again, this feeling of like, you're not quite white, you're not quite black, you're in between and thus kind of like nowhere, which is certainly Neptunian. So I can't wait to look into that and hopefully add it to this body of work.
Yeah. And I'll just again kind of, give you some kudos. Lots of people saying, how much that it meant to them, and that sort of different perspective on Neptune and spirituality.
Mhm.
So, from your research, do you see where this connection with Neptune originated, where it comes from? Do you think the same connection is strong for African people as well?
I certainly do, because that's kind of like the origin of us, right? So those spiritual roots are so deeply enriched by the continent, right? As a Black American, I felt that it was a little bit more within my grasp and agency to speak about the Black American experience, because I'm a little bit removed from the African experience, especially the African experience on the continent. But absolutely, they have been subject to the same kinds of erosions and projections and illusions, and the entire diaspora, no matter where on the world that they are, I think can map onto this Neptunian experience for sure. But I just kind of centered in on the American experience since that feels a little bit more like my expertise.
Wonderful. Okay, well, we don't have any other specific questions, but I guess I would add one. One of the things that struck me when you first started was you said Neptune is the planet of the oppressed. And often, and when I'm doing readings or when I'm looking at Neptune, that's a piece of it that I forget.
Yeah.
And so would you say that this could be kind of broadly, like some of these topics can be broadly adapted to other peoples that have been oppressed throughout?
Absolutely. I think that there is a Neptune connection in the communities of all marginalized folks because you're right, it just Neptune generally speaks to like your weekend, there's kind of like a formlessness, right? There's no, I don't want to say the word agency, but yeah, it's kind of like marginalized folks occupy this liminal space where they're like here, but they're not quite being seen or recognized fully, right, for their humanity. And so it's definitely something that maps on to so many experiences of marginalization and even the more personal and individual experiences we have of our own disempowerment with the own forces that are in our personal lives. So absolutely, I think it's kind of like a broad stroke there. Yeah, with Neptune.
So, oh, here's an interesting question, but I wanted to first just kind of say thank you because I think that gives me a lot to think through, especially as I do readings for other people. And we look at ancestry and ancestral patterns, and if especially if you look at things through an evolutionary
Right.
astrology lens, or even genetics and
Yeah.
that lineage of
Yeah.
in internalizing the oppression. And so that's
And it's
beautiful.
so sticky, right? It's like, where's the narrative start and my own actual experience begin? Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And also, the dance between the oppressor and the oppressed.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of good stuff to really unpack and sit with here. I
Yeah.
think your presentation is not the kind where you just get up and you're like, okay, now I'm gonna go, wash the dishes. Like, it's like you
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah,
with
it
it,
gets people like
right?
food for thought. Yeah.
So we have a question here. This was the one that I was like, oh, that's so funny. Can you speak to the African American experience in mermaids? Do you?
Oh, that's so funny. So in that slide I shared about like the maritime archaeologists, there was actually an exhibit here in Washington, D.C. that reimagined the folks who didn't survive the transatlantic journey as having created their own Atlantis, as having created their own life just beneath the ocean, right? So kind of reimagining them as having thrived, right, in that Neptunian space. And of course, there would probably be more mermaids, right, in that kind of scenario. I hadn't thought about it at all until now, but I suppose there could be a connection to that undersea journey and the etherealness of mermaids, and even like Holly, the recent recast of The Little Mermaid and how she was Black as well. And so I'm thinking about all that. Not really a succinct answer, but certainly there's a connection.
Right.
That's
Well, and
cool to
with
think
Neptune
about.
and Pisces,
Yeah.
what a like that's when it came out. And then there was
Yeah.
this concerted effort to push it down, like there was
Yep.
such backlash by people who were so frightened by that.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so that's fascinating. Okay,
it
what
is.
are your thoughts on how Neptune can be empowered? What are examples of citations of that kind of empowerment? I mean, you spoke a lot about music and creativity and poetry, but do you have any other kind of, I guess,
Yeah, I
advice for
think
people?
the empowered take on Neptune, it is what I said, like funneling maybe those feelings of sensitivity or disempowerment through like music, like getting it out in a more cathartic, productive way. But also like any kind of spiritual life, I always say like having an intentional relationship with Neptune is better because Neptune can be such a vague, slippery influence. So stepping into Neptunian spaces, whether it's like a spiritual space or anything that kind of connects you back to your own sense of spirit, that can be a walk in nature or cutting up vegetables in your garden, whatever it is. So there are ways that Neptune can be incredibly empowering and kind of expand our awareness of like, okay, I'm not just this meat bag. I am so much more and so much bigger. And I think that is a thought that is exciting and uplifting in a lot of ways. But I do think there needs to be like an intentional relationship there with Neptune out of all the planets, just because it is so slippery.
Yeah, and now in Aries, hopefully there is some degree of empowerment.
Yes,
I know
please.
that we've been seeing the dismantling of so much and the dissolving, and that kind of goes to this next question. When does Neptune awaken versus dissolve?
I think that depends on the entity that it's happening to, right? So I think I mentioned in my talk, like you can be presented a situation, and it can be the catalyst for awakening, like if the person is rising to the occasion of whatever this disruption is. Or again, it could be that fear, as with like the Black Ariel, where it's like, no, I'm gonna like react, I'm gonna numb, I'm gonna deny, I'm gonna enter this space of like victimhood, which is also a Neptunian archetype. So I think it just depends on the person's reaction to how are you going to react to this part of your world melting away? Is it going to be something that can be generative, or is it something that, will be disempowering and, make you a ghost in your own life? And I think oftentimes it could be both. It's a spectrum and it's absolutely a journey. Yeah, but I think it's individual consciousness that decides how it's going to go.
The energies or the ingress into Aries, would this, in your mind, be a new beginning or an opportunity for healing with Chiron also in Aries at this time?
I do, and that's my Pollyanna take that Neptune and Aries will be this like collective awakening, right? Because what is Pisces if not this like dream state, right? So we Aries is kind of like this shot of caffeine or like this bolt of like, oh shit, these things are happening. Like, let's wake up to this, let's take action, let's connect a little bit more, right? Less about the individuality of Aries, but the connectiveness of now Neptune being in that sign is like, oh, there's other individuals on this planet with me. Like, how can I broker those connections as well? So I do think it's something that can be ultimately quite empowering, but I am still holding space for reality and how it can also be a fight between spiritual camps or the increasing nature, right, of like, vitriol. Like I'm holding space for both, but I'm hoping it's the positive one.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing I'll say is that when Neptune went into Aries, we did start to see a sea change because I think there was so much hopelessness for so many
That's
people
right.
that people did begin to find their voice again. They did begin to speak up. They didn't just say like, we're going to erase
That's right.
all of the progress or at least the awareness. I don't know that there was that much progress, but at least there was a conversation and now they're erasing the conversation.
Mm,
So,
yeah,
it's interesting that Neptune's in Aries, Chiron's in Aries. So there's the healing portion, but also the wound, but
that's
not
right.
Saturn. I think Saturn's a little bit of it's a little bit of the wild card, right? Of what people do with it, because it can be like, clamping down, or it can be this like cleaning up a mess,
You're
right?
so right. Yeah. So like which way is it gonna go? I think
Yeah,
about that often.
I'm like you, I'm trying to be optimistic. Since things have not been going so great in my personal opinion, but I'll keep that out of this, Sopa. Okay, so I think Neptune can also bring higher clarity and the moral high ground. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, it can bring a sense of clarity, right? The interesting thing about Neptune is that it's going to dissolve something. It's just a dissolving agent. One of the things it can do is it can dissolve the stories of ego, right? And then that can lead to a kind of awakening. And it can also like dissolve your connection to source. And you just kind of think, again, like you're just this individual human being chaotically just thrown into this world. So yeah, I do think there is a side of Neptune that can give you quite clear perspective about the human condition, which gives you, I guess, like this removal from it, but also allows you to keep, I don't know, maybe even like a sense of humor about all these dramas that we go through down here, keeping like the
Okay.
spiritual perspective of like, okay, like I'm going to be here on the earth, but I'm not going to be of it. And I think that is empowering and clear, or brings clarity in and of itself.
Well, I just want to say that everyone has been very moved by your presentation.
I'm
And so
glad.
thank you. I want to thank you on behalf of OPA. I also want to thank you on behalf of me for showing Beyonce's chart that we now have time because I
You
didn't know
do.
that. So I'm going to go check that out. That seems like something that everyone should know. And that huge stellium in the seventh house.
Libra stellium seventh house.
Oh my God. And
Yes,
then that just all becomes clear with that, like her Lemonade album. Oh my God. So good. Okay.
absolutely.
So anyway, thank you so much, Camille. This
Thank
will
you.
be posted online. And you can go to the WOPA website to check this out. If you know, there's a lot to unpack. If you want to watch it again, it will be on our YouTube channel, the OPA YouTube channel. And if you did sign up for this, you will get a copy of the link to that. And so thank you so much, Camille. I hope you do more with
Thank
OPA.
you.
And everybody, I hope you have a lovely rest of your weekend. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.